Hey guys, it's Mike here, and in this video, I'm going to be bringing you a review of the movie Rampage. The story of Rampage follows Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as primatologist Davis Oki, who is a caretaker for gorillas at a zoo. However, when a mysterious object crashes down into the gorilla enclosure, an albino gorilla named George is exposed to a gas which causes him to undergo a transformation, becoming larger, stronger, and more dangerous. When the government attempts to take George for themselves, The Rock and scientist Dr. Kate Caldwell, played by Naomi Harris, must intervene to try and protect George. However, they soon discover that George wasn't the only animal affected by the gas, and must try to save the day while these giant creatures go on a city-destroying rampage. So Rampage is a movie based on the classic arcade game Rampage from back in the 1980s. And as a kid, I played and enjoyed all of the games, not only at my local arcade, but also on home console like Rampage World Tour. These games are fun, smashing, and destruction-based games where you play as a giant monster and your goal is to literally destroy and smash everything in sight, while occasionally eating some people or toxic sludge for a power-up. But as far as a real story and narrative beyond that, there isn't much of one to go on. So this movie had the opportunity to adapt these games and to also use them to tell a story all their own, and I think they did a good job with that. Rampage is a fun action disaster movie which delivers on much of what you expect going into it. There's giant mutated animals who go on a rampage in this film, there's a lot of destruction, and there's many of the staples you would come to expect from a Rock movie and a CG spectacle film like this. The action in this movie can be a lot of fun and really invokes many classic monster movies such as Godzilla and King Kong. And at points such as during the hunt for one of the giant mutated creatures, a wolf named Ralph, the film even takes on a Jurassic Park sort of vibe, particularly the original and Jurassic World. And I think all of this fits in with the nature of this film and its premise. But the movie isn't all action, and there are some points which primarily focus around the human characters in this film. However, unlike many other action movies of this type, I think that this movie does a far better job with those parts. A large reason for that is the connection between The Rock's character and George the gorilla, and they do a good job giving audiences an emotional connection to George as well as The Rock, and making us care about both of them. George is mostly CG, but they work in some practical effects from time to time, which is something I really appreciate in the CG-saturated blockbusters of today. They also make George stand out by being an albino gorilla, and he even knows sign language, which leads to some funny exchanges. But a lot of it has to also come down to The Rock, who does a good job with the material he's given, even when it isn't the best. And it just continues to show how strong of a leading action star he's become in this era, when he can still keep the audiences engaged even during parts which could normally be less exciting. But the film is also kept under 2 hours, so there isn't an obnoxious number of scenes that stop the momentum. Naomi Harris does alright with the material given to her in this film too. Her character is a scientist who is involved in the company behind the gas that infected the animals. I liked her in the role of Moneypenny in the Daniel Craig James Bond films, but her role here is pretty standard. Jeffrey Dean Morgan was also someone who I enjoyed in this movie. Some of his dialogue is also pretty weird, but he gives a fun, albeit over-the-top performance that makes him a likable character in the movie. He is also, interestingly, one of the 2 lead actors from Zack Snyder's Watchmen film to be in this movie. Now, as far as the negatives, the villains of this film are pretty weak. Played by Malin Ackerman and Jake Lacey, they're basically just generic mustache-twirling villains who exist to have villains. Their performances aren't really the best here either, which is likely due in part to my next problem. The film had some pretty weak writing at times, especially with the dialogue, and this hampers many of the performances. The Rock, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, and Naomi Harris do their best, but in the end it's not really that well written, and it gives the film a little too many eye-rolling moments. But overall, I enjoyed Rampage, and a lot more than I expected. I enjoyed it a lot more than, say, Pacific Rim 2, which probably helps that this movie felt a lot less like a soulless cash grab. And it's sad for me that Dwayne Johnson and a CG ape had more chemistry than any 2 real humans in that movie. But as a fun popcorn movie, this was pretty good, and as a video video game adaptation, this has to be one of the best, if only because of how bare bones the story was in the original source material. Not a great movie, but it's something I could see myself rewatching in the future, and probably still enjoying. As for a rating, I'm between a 6 and 7 at the moment, but for my first viewing, I'm going to give Rampage a 7 out of 10. And perhaps this rating will change upon revisit. Alright guys, so did you see Rampage, and if so, what did you think about it? Let me know down below. And if you like this content, then make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you could see all of my content right away when it comes out.
Yeah, and you better subscribe, enable those damn notifications.